Chapter 19 of Allan and the Holy Flower. This recording is in the public domain. Allan and the Holy Flower by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 19. The True Holy Flower. When I came to myself again, it was to find that I had slept 15 or 16 hours, for the sun of a new day was high in the heavens. I was lying in a little shelter of boughs at the foot of that mound on which we flew the flag that guided us back over the waters of Lake Kirua. Near by was Hans, consuming a gigantic meal of meat which he had cooked over a neighbouring fire. With him, to my delight, I saw Mavovo, his head bound up, though otherwise but little the worse. The stone, which probably would have killed a thin-skulled white man, had done no more than knock him stupid and break the skin of his scalp, perhaps because the force of it was lessened by the gum man's ring, which, like most Zulus of certain age or dignity, he wore woven in his hair. The two tents we had brought with us to the lake were pitched not far away, and looked quite pretty and peaceful there in the sunlight. Hans, who was watching me out of the corner of his eye, ran to me with a large pannikin of hot coffee which Sammy had made ready against my awakening, for they knew that my sleep was or had become of a natural order. I drank it to the last drop, and in all my life never did I enjoy anything more. Then, while I began upon some pieces of the toasted meat, I asked him what had happened. "Not much, Baas," he answered, "except that we are alive, who should be dead. The Maam and the Missie are still asleep in that tent, or at least the Maam is, for the Missie is helping Dogeetah, her father, to nurse Baas Stephen, who has an ugly wound. The Pongos have gone, and I think will not return, for they have had enough of the white man's guns. The Mazitu have buried those of their dead whom they could recover, and have sent their wounded, of whom there were only 6, back to Beza Town on litters. That is all, Baas." Then, while I washed, and never did I need a bath more, and put on my underclothes, in which I had swum on the night of the killing of the Motombo, that Hans had wrung out and dried in the sun, I asked that worthy how he was after his adventures. "Oh, well enough, Baas," he answered, "now that my stomach is full, except that my hands and wrists are sore with crawling around the ground like a babyan (baboon), and that I cannot get the stink of that god's skin out of my nose. Oh, you don't know what it was. If I had been a white man it would have killed me. But, Baas, perhaps you did well to take drunken old Hans with you on this journey after all, for I was clever about the little gun, wasn't I? Also about your swimming of the crocodile water, though it is true that the sign of the spider and the moth which your reverend father sent taught me that. And now we have got back safe, except for the Mazitu, Jerry, who doesn't matter, for there are plenty more like him, and the wound in Baas Stephen's shoulder, and that heavy flour which he thought better than brandy." "Yes, Hans," I said, "I did well to take you, and you are clever, for had it not been for you we should now be cooked and eaten in Pongo land. I thank you for your help, old friend. But, Hans, another time please sew up the holes of your waistcoat pocket. 4 caps wasn't much, Hans." "No, Baas, but it was enough, as they were all good ones. If there had been 40 you could not have done much more. Oh, your reverend father knew all that." My departed parent had become a kind of patron saint to Hans, and did not wish this poor old Hottentot to have more to carry than was needed. He knew you wouldn't miss, Baas, and that there were only one God, one devil, and one man waiting to be killed. I laughed, for Hans's way of putting things was certainly original, and having got on my coat, went to see Stephen. At the door of the tent I met Brother John, whose shoulder was dreadfully sore from the rubbing of the orchid stretcher, as were his hands with paddling, but who otherwise was well enough and of course supremely happy. He told me that he had cleansed and sewn up Stephen's wound, which appeared to be doing well, though the spear had pierced right through the shoulder, luckily without cutting any artery. So I went in to see the patient and found him cheerful enough, though weak from weariness and loss of blood, with Miss Hope feeding him with broth from a wooden native spoon. I didn't stop very long, especially after he got on to the subject of the lost orchid, about which he began to show signs of excitement. This I allayed as well as I could by telling him that I had preserved a pod of the seed, news at which he was delighted. "There," he said, "to think that you, Allan, should have remembered to take that precaution when I, an orchidist, forgot all about it." "Ah, my boy," I answered, "I have lived long enough to learn never to leave anything behind that I can possibly carry away. Also, although not an orchidist, It occurred to me that there are more ways of propagating a plant than from the original root, which generally won't go into one's pocket. Then he began to give me elaborate instructions as to the preservation of the seed pod in a perfectly dry and airtight box, etc., at which point Miss Hope unceremoniously bundled me out of the tent. That afternoon we held a conference at which it was agreed that we should begin our return journey to Beza Town at once, as the place where we were camped was very malarious and there was always a risk of the Pongo paying us another visit. So a litter was made with a mat stretched over it in which Stephen could be carried, since fortunately there were plenty of bearers, and our other simple preparations were quickly completed. Mrs. Eversley and Hope were mounted on the 2 donkeys. Brother John, whose hurt legs showed signs of renewed weakness, rode his white ox, which was now quite fat again. The wounded hero Stephen, as I have said, was carried, and I walked, comparing notes with old Babemba on the Pongo, their manners, which I am bound to say were good, and their customs that, as the saying goes, were simply beastly. How delighted that ancient warrior was to hear again about the sacred cave, the Crocodile River, the mountain forest and its terrible god, of the death of which and of the Motombo he made me tell him the story 3 times over. At the conclusion of the 3rd recital he said quietly, "My lord Macumazana, you are a great man, and I am glad to have lived if only to know you. No one else could have done these deeds." Of course I was complimented, but felt bound to point out Hans's share in our joint achievement. "Yes, yes," he answered, "the Spotted Snake, Inhulutu, has the cunning to scheme, but you have the power to do, and what is the use of a brain to plot without the arm to strike? The 2 do not go together because the plotter is not a striker, his mind is different. If the snake had the strength and brain of the elephant, and the fierce courage of the buffalo, soon there would be but one creature left in the world. But the Maker of all things knew this and kept them separate, my lord Macumazana." I thought, and still think, that there was a great deal of wisdom in this remark, simple as it seems. Oh, surely many of these savages whom we white men despise are no fools. After about an hour's march we camped till the moon rose, which it did at 10 o'clock, when we went on again till near dawn, as I thought it better that Stephen should travel in the cool of the night. I remember that our cavalcade, escorted before, behind, and on either flank by the Mazitu troops with their tall spears, looked picturesque and even imposing as it wound over those wide downs in the lovely peaceful light of the moon. There is no need for me to set out the details of the rest of our journey, which was not marked by any incident of importance. Stephen bore it very well, and Brother John, who was one of the best doctors I ever met, gave good reports of him. But I noted that he did not seem to get any stronger, although he ate plenty of food. Also Miss Hope, who nursed him, for her mother seemed to have no taste that way, informed me that he slept but little, as indeed I found out for myself. "Oh, Allan," she said, just before we reached Beza Town, "Stephen, your son," she used to call him my son, I don't know why, "is sick. The father says it is only the spear hurt, but I tell you it is more than the spear hurt. He is sick in himself." And the tears that filled her grey eyes showed me that she spoke what she believed. As a matter of fact she was right, for on the night after we reached the town Stephen was seized with an attack of some bad form of African fever, which in his weak state nearly cost him his life, contracted no doubt at that unhealthy Crocodile River. Our reception at Beza was most imposing, for the whole population, headed by old Bausi himself, came out to meet us with loud shouts of welcome, from which we had to ask them to desist for Stephen's sake. So in the end we got back to our huts with gratitude of heart. Indeed, we should have been very happy there for a while had it not been for our anxiety about Stephen. But it is always thus in the world. Who was ever allowed to eat his pot of honey without finding a fly or perhaps a cockroach in his mouth? In all, Stephen was really ill for about a month. On the 10th day after our arrival at Beza, according to my diary, which, having little else to do, I entered up fully at this time, we thought that he would surely die. Even Brother John, who attended him with the most constant skill, and who had ample quinine and other drugs at his command, for these we had brought with us from Durban in plenty, gave up the case. Day and night the poor fellow raved, and always about that confounded orchid, the loss of which seemed to weigh upon his mind as though it were a whole sackful of unrepented crimes. I really think that he owed his life to subterfuge.